Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilman is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 12 of my Kobolds and Catacombs card review. This time around I have 8 new cards, including some class cards for Warrior, a class we haven't seen a lot of in the reveal season so far. Up first I'll be doing detailed reviews, but if you don't have a lot of time, you're just looking to see these reveals and my 1 to 5 star ratings, you can use the link in the description below to skip to that point. But right now let's go ahead and jump into my detailed reviews. Up first, I have a new Warrior Minion. This is the Dry Whisker Armorer, a 2-mana 2/2, with a battle cry that reads, for each enemy minion, gain 2 armor. So clearly a really cheap, little, highly defensive heal-style card here. The first comparison I think of with this card is Cult Apothecary, the Whispers of the Old Gods card, a 5-mana 4/4, which heals you for 2 for each enemy minion on the board. Now that's a card that has never seen a ton of success. It's not played in Constructed, it's maybe okay in Arena, but is not a great card to model after because it just hasn't ever seen play. But thankfully, I think Dry Whisker Armorer gets a couple things right that the Cult Apothecary never did. First and foremost, it's much cheaper. It's only 2 mana, so you can flex this card into your turn a lot easier. It's so much easier to slot it in with some leftover mana or combo it with some sort of removal spell as well. So to me, Dry Whisker Armor right away, 10 times better than Cult Apothecary because it's so cheap. And the real value, of course, with these minions is that battle cry. You're playing it because you care that it restores health. And the fact that you can do so at a cheaper level for the exact same effect, that's good. But it's not actually the exact same effect, is it? Because this gives you armor instead of health. And of course, armor is far better than health because first off, it synergizes with warrior spells. Secondly, it is able to go over 30 health total. The Cult Apothecary is useless if you're at full health. The Dry Whisker Armor is not. You can go up to 30 plus, and that makes it a much better card in the early game when you might actually still have most of your health total. So if you're desperate for a play on turn 2 or 3, your opponent has a couple minions out, you could play this for 4 armor gain, and it really wouldn't be that terrible. It'd still be a 2/2 body. And a 2/2 body for 2 mana isn't all that bad either. Clearly not at cost like a 3/2 or a 2/3 would be, but closer, I think, to a valuable minion in the early game than Cult Apothecary ever was in the mid game. So essentially, everything about this card is a little bit better than Cult Apothecary. That doesn't necessarily make it good. I do think this is a strong little card, though. I think, especially given some of the cards you're about to see on this list, or one in particular, the ability to gain armor against a wide board is going to be very valuable for Warrior, of course. Warrior likes some survivability. This does things differently than Armor Smith. It operates in a very similar space, a minion that gains you armor, but it's instant, allows you to be more reactive than Armor Smith, which often takes a little while to start building up steam, or some sort of big combo turn where you have a lot of minions and whirlwinds, which isn't always easy to accomplish and often uses multiple spells or multiple cards to pull that off, so it can be more demanding from a resource allocation standpoint as well. So to me, Dry Whisker Armor does things on its own. It isn't as reliant on other things like Armor Smith. More reactive, better upside, combos really well as a cheap card. So it does a lot of things well, and I think the armor gain and life gain is significant enough for some versions of Warrior for this card to make sense. Now to be clear, I don't think this card will be right for every single list. Some decks might be built in a way that don't make as much sense with Dry Whisker Armor, and certainly some metas might not support this card as much. I think it really starts to get good when there are 3 or 4 or more minions. So in those zoo-style metas, Dry Whisker Armor makes a ton of sense. In more mid-rangey metas, kind of the ones we've seen lately, I think, I'm not sure Dry Whisker Armor is quite as good, although could still be played. So this is a card with a lot of potential. May not see a ton of play right away, but has what it needs to be a good card that does make the cut and gets included in higher tier decks. So up next we have another new Warrior card, and this is the one I mentioned that combos pretty well with the previous card on this list. This is Reckless Flurry, a new 3-mana spell, and it's a lot like Blade Flurry, but instead it's an Armor Flurry, in that you spend all of your armor and you deal that much damage to all minions. So if you had 10 armor, you go down to 0 armor and you deal 10 damage to the board, including your own minions, by the way. 10 armor may not be the most likely outcome. Often it might just be 2 from your hero power, maybe 5 from something like a shield block, maybe 6 from our previous card on the list, but enough often to provide a really reliable board clear. And even if you can just do 2 damage, Volcanic Potion is the kind of card that has seen play in the past, and this is identical to Volcanic Potion. The only downside, of course, is that there is an additional cost to something like Volcanic Potion, And that's where I start to get a little shaky on Reckless Flurry. A lot of people, I've been reading some comments, are totally in love with this card. I've seen some like 5-star, super amazing card, unbelievably great. And I'm not quite as convinced it's that good. I think it's playable. I think this is an okay card. I think there will be decks that want to use this versus other cards. But that cost, spending all your armor, I think is more significant of a downside than people realize. First off, if you don't have something like Dry Whisker armor to set up the perfect kind of 1-2 punch, where you gain 8 armor against a 4 minion board, and then you use that 8 armor to clear the board, killing your minion in the process, by the way. If you don't have exactly that, I think it's a lot harder to use this card and find places to use this card. Of course, you could also shield block and use this for a 5 damage AoE. That'd be fine. That's kind of like a 6-mana Dragon Fire Potion, because remember, you are sacrificing that armor. You're sacrificing the armor each and every time. So it's not just a 1-card combo ever. You have to do something else, even if that's just hero power, or maybe hero power over the course of the game. Those are like 2-mana commitments, and each of those adds up. If you have 6 armor left over from hero powers, that's 3 hero powers you spent on Reckless Fury, or Flurry, and that's essentially kind of a 6-mana thing. Now, of course, you always have leftover mana. In a desperate pinch, removing your armor to clear a board is absolutely worth it. Like, that's a trade-off that you're going to be willing to make. Killing 20 damage on the board by sacrificing 4 armor, always worth it. But there's going to be other instances where you've stabilized and you're at 10-12 armor and you've only got maybe 6 to 8 health because you made a late game stabilization. And it's like, am I really going to be willing to sacrifice 8 armor here? Is this just a dead card for the rest of the game? Can I ever give this up? And I'm not sure that you're going to want to. So some decks that have a game plan that's more late game stabilized and more control oriented might not find as much utility out of Reckless Flurry, because you're just constantly going to be refilling your armor and then emptying it and trying to build it back up. And I'm not sure that's an equation that people want to go through. And there's always those tough decisions. It's like, can I save myself here? Is there too much burn available in my opponent's deck? Do I have to Reckless Flurry? There's some really tough decision making there that I think is going to be more challenging than people give it credit for. On top of that, I do think that Warrior has a lot of great alternatives already that are working for the class as AoE removal cards. We've got Brawl, of course. You don't sacrifice anything with Brawl. We've got Sleep with the Fishes, which tends to work really well with other parts of Warrior's kit. So it's not just like, is Reckless Flurry good in a vacuum? It's, is Reckless Flurry better for my deck than the AoE tools that already exist? And is the sacrifice, the risk of losing my armor, worth it to improve against these other kinds of AoE? And I don't think that answer is quite as easy as everybody else seems to think. Now, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe it's always worth the risk. Maybe you're just constantly using this for like a 4 damage AoE and you're okay to regain that 4 armor later in a pinch. It's probably going to be worth it a lot of times. We'll see, I guess. I'm less convinced, but I'm sure a lot of people in the comments will try to tell me why I'm wrong. I want to hear those thoughts. For now, I still think the card is okay. I think it's okay. Probably a 3-star card. Just not a 5-star card like I've seen a lot of people say. I don't have quite that much hope for this one. So now let's move on to another Warrior spell. This time around is the Unidentified Shield. This is a new 6-mana spell, and it's another one of the unidentified cards we've seen previously with Unidentified Elixir for Priest and Unidentified Maul for Paladin. This one gives you 5 armor right off the bat, and then it gains another bonus effect as soon as you draw this, anytime it's in your hand. It gets another random bonus effect, one of 4 choices, which you can see here. It can gain the ability to summon a 5/5 Golem. It can gain the ability to deal 5 damage. It can gain the ability to gain you 10 more armor, or it can gain the ability to equip a 5/2 weapon. Now, I think there's sort of a theme here. 3 of these I think are pretty reasonably good, and then one of them I think is fairly weak, and that's something we've seen before with the other unidentified cards. And that is that I think gaining 10 more armor is probably not the one you're going to want to see, just because it's a very passive sort of thing and very, very slow and super defensive, but not impactful on the board. And that's a lot of mana to commit to armor. You know, we've seen with cards before that, like Ironhide, for instance, that 5 mana is roughly worth, or 5 armor is roughly worth 1 mana. So to gain 15, you think maybe that's a 3 or 4 mana card at best, certainly not a 6 mana card for that much healing. It's overcosted compared to other things. But as far as like Rune Shield and Serrated Shield are concerned, the 2 at the top there, those compare to other cards we've seen in Hearthstone. The Rune Shield is absolutely just Shield Maiden, a previous Warrior card, a 6 mana 5/5 that gives you 5 armor. That was a playable card. Serrated Shield is Holy Fire, with a little upside actually, because armor is always better than health. And Holy Fire is an okay card. It's been played. It's played a little bit right now even. And then Spike Shield is essentially, Arcanite Reaper with a little upside. Very reasonable for 6 mana. That's a fairly costed card. The problem, though, with all of this is that it's so inconsistent. You never know which one of these you're going to get. With the other two unidentified cards, I think the big distinction was most of their value, like most of why you'd want to run them, was tied into the consistent aspect. So for Priest, it was the minion buff. For Paladin, it's the weapon itself. And the undecided, the unidentified parts of it were minor. They were smaller. They contributed to the value. They didn't make up a majority of it. That's swapped here with the Unidentified Shield. Like the 5/5 Golem is a bigger chunk than the 5 armor. The 5 armor is a secondary background sort of aspect. The deal 5 damage is the primary thing. And that means that you can't direct this card into a deck list as efficiently as you could those previous unidentified cards. It's like, for instance, if you put this in Control Warrior, which is where it typically makes the most sense, it's like, if you get the 5/2 weapon, is that going to be good? Is that what you need? Do you need a 5/5 Golem? You need the 5 damage? It's hard to figure out exactly which of these makes the most sense. Now, I still think the card is okay. I'm not trash talking the card. I think it's another playable card. I think this will be another 3-star card, for instance. It's just that the consistency can hurt you a little bit. Not knowing what you're going to have and not understanding the tools that are available to you until you draw it and then it sits in your hand and you have to kind of decide how to use it. That's tough, especially because this is a higher cost card. So it might be sitting in your hand a while, might come later in the game and not fit into your game plan or your mana costs very well. It might feel like a dead card sometimes. Also, the risk of getting Tower Shield, I think, is very, very unfortunate because a lot of the times that's going to be a disappointment. That's not what you want because it's not active or significant enough as far as board impact is concerned. So a couple consistency issues here and a couple riskiness issues. When you just look at each of these on their own, 3 out of the 4 are okay cards, not above average cards. And I mentioned this on stream when I first talked about this card. I feel like this should probably cost 5 mana. I think you should get a little bit of a discount to make up for the unpredictability. At 6 mana, all of these look like fairly costed things, and I think they should be undercosted so that you feel better about playing them. It feels like you're gaining an advantage because you are sacrificing something by losing the consistency or predictability or reliability of these cards. So I think this would be a great card at 5 mana. I think it's merely an okay card at 6 mana. So now let's move on to a new mage card that is anything but okay. This is the Leyline Manipulator, a new 4 mana 4/5, so Yeti stat line right off the bat, good vanilla stat line. It's an elemental, so a positive tribal synergy tag, and it has an absurd battle cry. If you're holding any cards that didn't start in your deck, reduce their cost by 2. And now note that that says any cards. It's not just spells, it's cards. So anything that you didn't start with. Spells off of any kind of spell generation thing, like Primordial Glyph or Kobolds Tome. Minions off of Simulacrum. There's a bajillion different ways to get cards in your hand and reduce their cost with Layline Manipulator. Of course, cost reductions are really, really good in Hearthstone. Being able to cheat things out faster or more things at once is often really powerful because it's a lot of tempo gain. So Layline Manipulator has a very positive effect here. This is incredibly strong. You're not even sacrificing anything for that effect because this has a great stat line. A 4/5 body for 4 is also really good. And this obviously plays into any elemental synergies you might have in your deck with things like Jaina or just other elementals that require you to play elementals on the previous turn, like Blaze Caller or Servant of Kalamos, for instance. So there's a lot about this card that is just absolutely perfect. Now, what kind of deck would it be included in? I think you could honestly put it in almost any kind of mage deck and find some success. This works in Quest Mage, of course, because it synergizes with cards that didn't start in your deck, which Quest Mage is all about. Also, a lot of people have been noting that this does enable a combo for where you can pull off an infinite fireball turn without actually running the quest. So there might be a variation there because of the cost reduction you can get to Simulacrum with Sorcerer's Apprentices. You can play your Sorcerer's Apprentices, the first 2 for free if they came off Simulacrum. Then you can do the Molten Reflection shenanigans and still squeeze in an Antonitis and go ham all in a single turn. Clearly, this has some elemental or grinder style mage implications with Jaina. It honestly could just fit in almost anything because it's a solid statted minion with a generally good battle cry that mage has a lot of different ways to take advantage of. So to me, this looks like just one of those fundamentally very powerful cards. Synergizes with its class beautifully across all archetypes. I really like Layline Manipulator. There's just nothing really bad to say about this one. There's no risks, no downsides. It's just all upside, and it works really well. It's better than other 4-cost minions. I think you'd rather run this than something like Water Elemental in most environments, for instance. So, 100% A+ card. Blizzard designed a very scary and very powerful one here. On the other side of that power spectrum, we have the next mage card. Thankfully, I think this one's rather bad. This is Deck of Wonders, a new 5-mana spell for mage. It once again encourages some random shenanigans. As you'll see, it shuffles 5 scrolls into your deck, and then when you draw those scrolls, you cast a random spell. So you can think of this one a bit like Beneath the Grounds, in that it shuffles things into your deck, and they work just like the Nerubians, but instead of summoning a 4/4, it just casts a random spell. Think Yogg-Saron style, totally random spell, totally random targets, etc. And it does actually cycle you into a new card, so it's not sacrificing your card draw. It's just a trigger that casts off a random spell, you draw your next card. And there's 5 of those in your deck. You could get all 5 in a row. You could get them spaced out over the course of the game. The problem is that random spells are random. They're just not that good. They're very unpredictable. They can often benefit you in Mage. Like, a lot of them are in very beneficial directions. Things like Blizzard and Flame Strike. Like, those never hurt you. They only hurt your opponent. There are other things like Secrets and Arcane Intellect, all of which are basically risk-free. They do really well. But of course, there are other things too. Mage has a lot of burn damage and spells that just don't accomplish anything, just high-cost things that would be a complete waste. So there's a lot of downsides too. And unfortunately, with a card like this, you're spending 5 mana. That's a really big commitment to get this thing rolling. And you just often can't pass a turn in Hearthstone. You just can't give up 5 mana on turn 5 and do nothing and hope that you get a good high roll in the future. That just doesn't work for most metas that we've ever seen. So if this were like 2 or 3 mana, this might be a playable card. Because again, most of the spells that Mage gets are positively aligned and they could benefit you and really swing in your favor. But at 5 mana, it's just not going to be worth the cost. The risks are too high. You fireball your face a couple times. You cut Deck of Wonders because you've also sacrificed an entire 5 mana turn. So really slow card. I think much more designed as a meme card, a fun card. And it'll be fun. Like, everybody's going to build a Yogg-Saron deck with Deck of Wonders, right? That's going to happen. It's going to be enjoyable. But this will not be a competitive card by any means. This one's pretty bad. So now let's move on to some rogue cards. Up first, we have the last rogue secret. This is Evasion. A new 2-mana secret, of course, like the others. And this one reads, after your hero takes damage, you become immune this turn. And a lot of people are comparing this one to Ice Block and saying, oh my god, it's a better Ice Block. But I would venture it's actually a much worse Ice Block. And let me talk about why. There's a very important distinction in the wording between Evasion and Ice Block. With Evasion, it says, after your hero takes damage, you become immune this turn, which means the first instance of damage gets to go through. So if they have an 8/8 on board, and you're like, I have 7 health, I better put Evasion up, I'm going to live, it won't help. The 8/8 will kill you, the secret will never trigger. If they have a 1/1 on board and attack you with a 1/1, yes, the secret will trigger, you'll become immune, then their 8/8 would be wasted. They would have screwed up and left you alive for another turn. So that's the first problem, right? It's not a guarantee like Ice Block, or at least depending on the board state, it's not a guarantee like Ice Block. Ice Block, you know you're always going to survive no matter what because it's when your hero takes damage. That first instance of damage does not go through. So that's one important distinction. The second problem, of course, with Evasion is that you can't play it in preparation like you can Ice Block. No pun intended with the card preparation, by the way. But you can't play this one ahead of time. You can't load it up and then bank it for the next 5 turns. Often mages will just pop Ice Block on turn 3 and you won't see it until 10 turns down the road when they finally fall over to their opponent and Ice Block gets popped. Evasion doesn't work that way. If you play this on turn 2, whatever instance of damage finally hits you in the face is going to waste your Evasion. So essentially, to make this an actually really valuable card, you have to time it perfectly. You have to know exactly when your opponent is on a turn where they're going to kill you, you have to save evasion in your hand until that point, and then you have to pop evasion knowing that you can survive that turn. So it's much, much more difficult to use in two regards there, right? It's both the single instance of damage going through, so you have to know that the board is in a favorable position where they can't kill you with any given minion. And secondly, you have to figure out when you want to play this thing, because eventually your opponent is going to pop it. So way, way worse than Ice Block. Comes at a slight cost reduction, but significantly weaker. Now, this does synergize a little bit with another rogue secret, Sudden Betrayal, where it basically, that secret encourages your opponent to attack you with a small minion so they don't accidentally trade giant minions into one another via betrayal. But I don't think that sort of support for each other and these secrets is enough, because evasion looks really challenging to use to me. The others don't seem that strong either, so I kind of feel like the secret package in general, when you look at it as a whole, is really going to fall short. I don't think they're going to do enough or be tricky enough for your opponents, and they're going to be really, really challenging to use as well. So this card to me, I don't think it's going to see much play. Now, with a card like this, there's always some way to use it. There's shenanigans, there's combos, there's Malygos stuff that somebody will figure out a way to use this. So I'm not saying it's totally unplayable. I think there's some niche deck that will probably use this to some degree of success. But most of the time, in the average rogue deck, for most of us, this card is one that won't see play. So up next we have another rogue card here. This is a new minion, the Elven Minstrel, a 4-mana 3/2, and it reads combo, draw 2 minions from your deck. So this is a 4-mana card draw card, essentially. You can think of things like Gnomish Inventor, maybe to compare this to immediately. But it's in a more specific fashion, and then it doesn't just draw you any random card, it draws you specifically minions, and it draws you 2 of them, so twice the draw power compared to something like Gnomish Inventor, and that's obviously really strong. Drawing 2 cards when attached to a body, that is worthwhile for 4 mana. The stat line here, not perfect by any means. I like Gnomish Inventor's stat line better because it trades more into early game boards. This minion is very, very susceptible to all kinds of trades. It doesn't trade up particularly well into bigger stuff like at 5 mana, and it dies to lower cost, even 1 and 2 mana minions as well. So the stat line here is a major problem for Elven Minstrel. But that said, kind of like the last card, anytime a card does something very strong in a very narrow focus, it often finds a way to be played. For instance, Elven Minstrel has all kinds of combo potential. When you know you can run a certain amount of minions in your deck, think maybe 2 Elven Minstrels and 2 Cold Light Oracles, or 2 Elven Minstrels and 2 Gadgetzan Auctioneers, you can really guarantee what you're going to draw. For instance, maybe a Malygos. You know you can hit your Malygos for your combo if you play Elven Minstrel, because you either draw a second Elven Minstrel or a Malygos. That's it. That's 2 minions, right? So the card like this clearly does have some uses. I do not think, much like the previous card, this will be in every deck. I think the stat line is too weak. I think the combo is actually a fairly challenging aspect as well, just because if you wanted to play this on turn 4, you can't really do it that easily outside of like backstabs. It probably waits to turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, where the body becomes even more inconsequential and the stat line is even a bigger challenge for this card, and finding space for it in your turn without dying becomes difficult as well. So a lot of problems associated with the stat line here. But again, that can all be forgiven if your deck is trying to execute some specific game plan and you know that landing your Auctioneer on 6 is enough to win you the game in Miracle Rogue, or if you know that hitting your Malygos is going to give you the win, then a card like this could work. Maybe it works in Mill Rogue to draw Cold Light Oracles, for instance. Keep an eye on this one. I think it's a bad card in general, just because you're sacrificing so much. And spells are also really powerful in Rogue too, so just drawing minions isn't always great. Sometimes you want to draw spells. It's not a great reload card, for instance. I don't think in Tempo Rogue, they don't typically have a problem running out of cards because they curve out so smoothly. They usually just win the game before that becomes a problem. So not an everyday card, not an every deck card, but still a card that is interesting enough, aligned so narrowly and so specifically in what it does that somebody might find a home for it. Not completely unplayable, I think just a little bit on the weak side. And then finally I have one last neutral minion here. This is the Furbolg Mossbinder, a new 5-mana 1/1 with a battle cry that reads, transform a friendly minion into a 6/6 elemental. So obviously a 1/1 for 5 is disastrously bad, but 6/6 for 5 is pretty good. And in fact, a 6/6 plus a 1/1 is really good. That would be a 7/7 in stats for 5 mana. The problem, of course, with Furbolg is that you do have to have a minion on board to make it work. And I think that right there is enough to kill this card for most classes. Most classes just can't consistently enough say, I'm going to have a minion on board all the time to make Furbolg Mossbinder worth it. So they just often have a card in hand that's a 5-mana 1/1 that they simply can't play very successfully until maybe like turn 10 or turn 8 where you can combo it out immediately with another card. In which case, you can't just sit on a 5-mana card that long in most decks, leaving it pretty unsuccessful, because it really only just gives you a stat dump anyway. It's not doing anything that absurd or that powerful or that immediate. So most people are going to not play, most classes won't be playing Furbolg ever. Now, with things like Paladin and Shaman, I do think Furbolg becomes a little more interesting because they have the hero power and they tend to have minions that are lingering around more successfully. So I think there is perhaps a world where turning totems and turning dudes into 6/6s becomes a thing that Furbolg Mossbinder does somewhat successfully. Now, of course, it's not just like totems and dudes that are good. You could also play like a Yeti. You'd trade your Yeti in, your Yeti comes down to a 4/1. Furbolg Mossbinder can essentially heal that Yeti and turn it into something bigger. So it's not just taking really tiny stuff and transforming it. You can also take mid-game minions and successfully transform them as sort of a heal card as well. That's less ideal of an application of this card, but still something that would work pretty well. The fact that it's an elemental, mostly irrelevant for a vast majority of elemental synergy cards, because most elemental synergies rely on the fact that you played an elemental from your hand the last turn, and this one does not play an elemental, it just summons one, so this would not activate things like Blaze Caller, so I don't think traditional elemental decks make very much sense with this, outside of perhaps something like Grumble World Shaker and Shaman, where you can pull cards back into your hand. That becomes a little more intriguing, because of course Furbolg Mossbinder has a good battle cry, and you get an elemental that you can play in the future, although you probably don't want to spend that much mana on an elemental, just a raw elemental like that. So I'm not even sure that's an application. One other interesting synergy with this card that was pointed out to me is Jaina. Frostlich Jaina works pretty interestingly with this card, because that does give it a true elemental synergy, in that the elemental would have lifesteal. And of course, summoning a 1/1 minion is pretty good in Jaina too, because you can ping it. So you could, for instance, have a lingering water elemental on board that's like a 3/1, you transform that into a 6/6, you ping your Furbolg, and you've got a pretty big dump of stats. The problem with that, even though it does work really cool and it's a pretty cute little combo, is that I don't think you'd want to just run this minion in Jaina. It'd be a dead card until you played Frostless Jaina. I don't think you can do that. I think it'd just be far too inconsistent and too weak for a deck that's very refined in its late game control kind of game plan. So even there, I don't think Furbolg Mossbinder makes sense. So basically, all that summed up is, I think this card's going to be really challenging to use, and even when you use it, the potential isn't all that impressive. A 7/7 for 5 mana isn't that amazing in the scheme of Hearthstone. We do a lot more powerful things. So that essentially means this card is going to get left behind and will not see all that much play. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for my detailed reviews. What I'd like to do now is jump into my quick reviews, rating each of these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Dry Whisker Armor is a 4-star card. Reckless Flurry is a 3-star card. Unidentified Shield is a 3-star card. Layline Manipulator is a 5-star card. Deck of Wonders is a 1-star card. Evasion is a 2-star card. Elven Minstrel is a 2-star card. And finally, Furbolg Mossbinder is a 2-star card. And there you go, guys. That wraps it up for part 12 of my Kobolds and Catacombs card review. Mixed bag here on these cards, but still some interesting new mechanics and some fun stuff I'm excited to try. I'm also curious what you guys think about these cards. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.